So thank you very much for inviting us. And please, if you don't understand maybe our pronunciations of words, it's a little bit strange. You know, it's a mixture of the chef from the Muppet Show and an Ingmar Bergman movie from the 1970s. So, but please, you know, raise your hand if there's something you don't understand, or if you have questions while we're speaking, feel free to ask those questions. Well, I'm Ronny Tikkanen. I work at the University of Gothenburg. I'm a social worker. I've been a social worker for 20 years now. The past 10 years I work with social work education and research. I'll talk more about my research later on. And this is my colleague and friend, I say Malin Lindroth from Malmo University.
Yes.
And she's a registered nurse, but also a doctor in sexology and health
and society, it's called.
Yeah.
Mm. Yes. This first slide just introduces me and you to what we are going to talk about. We are going to present some research, mainly research on sexual health among young people in Sweden. And also sexual health among young people at... This is a tricky question. I don't know what your institutions are called, but I explained to the woman who spoke earlier, she left, that the institutions we have are something of a mix of residential homes, that's a British word, secure units. Yeah. So one of the research projects revolves around sexual health among those young persons. Yeah. I think that's
We talk quite a lot about sexual health,
yep,
but maybe you should mention a little bit what we mean with sexual health. When you ask a researcher within sexuality and about the definition of sexual health, we get something like a sparkle in our eyes, and we usually mention this definition from the World Health Organization for 2002. I don't have it on a slide here, but I have a question. What do we mean with sexual health? And it's quite important to remind ourselves that sexual health is not only the absence of sexually transmitted infections and violence and all these negative things. As a social worker, I know we tend we have to sometimes get a focus on that, but we have to remember that sexual health is much more than that. It's also the presence of pleasure and a healthy, for the individual, healthy is well-being, social issues, mental issues. There's quite a lot of positive aspects related to sexual health. So we're trying to remind ourselves about that we have to focus on the positive things. And also in this definition from the World Health Organization, there is quite a lot of they put the importance of sexual rights, because you can't really talk about sexual health without talking about the sexual rights. And sometimes when I talk about sexual rights to my students or to my colleagues or practitioners, we tend to think about that the violation of sexual rights takes place somewhere else in the world, not here, not in the United Kingdom, not in Sweden. But I would say, yes, definitely, sexual rights is also violated in Sweden, and sorry to say that, most likely also here in the United Kingdom. And so what is the sexual rights? The World Health Organization also point out several rights that we have as sexual citizens. And I'm just going to mention just a few of them for you. I mean, one right is the right to a sexual body without violence, without mutilation, without torture, without being exposed to violence. Of course, that's basic. But also the right to sexual equality, meaning that no matter how old you are, your age, your sexual orientation, social class, or you have a background should matter when it comes to the rights you have. And I'm very happy to hear that in the UK, I think it was last Saturday, that you got the right for same-sex marriage here in the UK. So I think that's also showing very important that sexual rights is still an issue in Europe today. But also, of course, education. When you ask young people where do they get the most reliable information about sexuality, they usually answer from schools, because schools and teachers are the ones they trust. And so everyone has the right to sexual education. I'm sorry for being ignorant about the British situation, but in Sweden we have compulsory sexual education, so you can't really say that my children won't get sexual education, because that's written in the law. And you also have a right to sexual health care that is based on scientific knowledge, and that's my second thing I'm going to talk about, just in introduction here, that it's very important that we build our knowledge on scientific knowledge. We ask young people what are their experiences, what are their needs, and not build interventions, programs, policies on other issues, morals or beliefs what the young people need. And as a researcher, that's what I work with. The last 10 years I've conducted national studies about young people and sexuality. And 2009 I got this assignment or task from the National Board of Health and Welfare in Sweden to make a study about knowledge, attitudes and sexual behavior among young people in general in Sweden between 15 and 29. So what I did together with other colleagues, we collected quite a lot of information. 15,000 young people participated in the largest study ever made in Sweden. For Swedish, we're only 9 million in Sweden, so 15,000 is quite a lot. Where we asked the young people about their experiences and their needs in terms of sexual health. And I'm not going to go so very much in depth on the result from that study, but one thing that we saw from, and the results from the study is used by practitioners and in order to improve the quality of the sexual education and healthcare that's focused on young people. I'm just going to mention just a few things from the study, and then I'm going to link that on to my colleague Malin. One of the things we saw is condom use. Although we're quite good at sexual education in Sweden, condom use is very, very low in Sweden. I don't know the comparison with the UK, but we are the lowest in Scandinavia. 7 out of 10, if you look at the latest sexual situations, not only intercourses, but 7 out of 10 are unprotected in terms of condoms. But it's more common to use other contraceptive methods like the birth control pill and so on. So that's a little bit shocking for authorities. We try to raise the condom use because contraceptive pills, they don't protect for sexual transmitted infections. But on the other hand, when you ask young people what do they perceive about condom use, is it something negative? They usually say that not using a condom is related to intimacy and pleasure. The other way that we as health promoters, we want them to think about condoms as something positive, but they tend to think not using a condom is a sign of intimacy and that you want to get close to a partner and so on. But they still say when someone offers to use a condom, that person is considered a trustworthy and caring person. So there is a general positive attitude towards condom use, but it's very problematic in the sexual situation to use a condom for certain people. When I went deeper into the analysis of these 15,000 young people, we found that there are like a small group, 10% of young people that are more exposed to risk than other young people. And those people are also social vulnerable when it comes to other situations. They tend to, more than others, use alcohol on a daily basis, use other kind of drugs than alcohol in relation to sex. They have more sexual partners. Quite a larger percent of these young persons have had the sexual debut before the age of 15, which is the age of consent in Sweden. And that's itself is a marker for other kind of risk positions. And they also tell more stories about sex against one's will and also experience of sex against reimbursement. So what we found out that there are like a small group of young people that are in desperate need of services that meet their needs. When we continue to look at these young people, we saw that they are not ignorant in terms of knowledge. On the contrary, they know what they are lacking. When we asked them in the questionnaire what kind of information they need, they were aware that they needed more information. They also were aware that they were in the risk of getting a sexual transmitted infection. Sometimes I say they're not stupid. They know that they are in a risky situation. But when you compare them with young people in general, they tend to reduce the risks with getting a sexual transmitted infection. They don't think chlamydia is as severe as other young people do. And then I tried to say, well, it's quite rational, I think, because some of these young people have quite a lot of other things to deal with in their life, and compared with chlamydia, I would say, I mean, there are greater things that they have to deal with in their everyday life. So in one way, their answers are rational in that way. But we needed more information about people that are in institutional care. And the problem with surveys like this is that we don't tend to reach these persons with a questionnaire. And that's why I'm going to hand over to Malin, that we work together very closely, because Malin made a study about this specific group of young people.
And Ronny, I love listening to you, but please...
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We have to speed this up. Otherwise we won't get to the end of it, where the good stuff is.
Yeah, okay.
That was Swedish state feminist. Yeah. I'm telling him what to do. Yeah. Just very quickly. I think I'll stand. No, the camera. These are the laws. I don't know if they're similar to the ones you have in the UK, but I thought it would be interesting to just show them very briefly. The Care of Young Persons Act, LVU, and the Social Services Act. You can please. And these laws regulate that children and young people may be placed voluntarily or forcibly in foster homes or homes outside, or homes for care or residence. That's it. Please continue. And then we also have something called the Secure Youth Act, LSU, for some young, please continue. Some group homes, they also care for the ones under 18 who have committed serious criminal offenses. We do not have youth prisons. That's the difference, I believe. Yes? You can please continue. And so there are about 26,000 young persons under the age of 18 who are placed outside of their homes each year, according to any of these laws. And of course, there is an ongoing debate whether this is good or not. I'm not going to go into that. But out of these 26,000, about 1,000 each year are staying at these about 25, 30 institutions or residential group homes or secure units or a mix of it. So, please. My research question was what the sexual health among youth at governmental group homes, what is it like? We did not know because this is a so-called hard to reach group. And so the aim was to gain knowledge and to develop a sex education curriculum that is targeted at these youth and their needs and their lives, and to let them reflect upon it prior to its use. And the overall purpose of it all is to strengthen sexual health in a vulnerable group. And yeah, this one is mostly for me, but maybe for you as well. The results that we are presenting, they are on an aggregated level. It's important to remember that there are always individuals. So.
I'll try to be brief now, but now I'm going to show you quite a lot of numbers here, so I'm not going to go into all of this. We promised each other not to talk about the percentages, but what we did, I did my study with 15,000 young people. We picked out 5,940 of them. And Malin went around all over Sweden. You didn't tell that, but
No, I didn't.
she went to a lot of institutional care places and interviewed the young people there. And then we compared these two groups with each other. We already knew from the beginning that the group the Malin visited are more vulnerable in terms of sexual risk-taking. As you can see, the percentages are much higher in that first group compared with other. And that's something we already knew, that young people in institutional care are more vulnerable in terms of sexual risk-taking. I don't think I need to comment this anymore. Maybe we'll go on interpreting it instead together. So when we talk about being at risk, are these young people irrational, you would say, these people that are in group homes that have this quite high experience of sexual risk-taking?
No. What I've found mainly I did a questionnaire and also an interview study. And when I put all these results together, mainly what I found is an overall, is it called overarching or arching? Overarching theme, that it is worth the risk. Of course not non-consensual, violent sexual activities. We have to put them aside. But the sexual risk-taking, of course, gives these young persons something. I think it's the same for adults, by the way. And individual factors like age, if you have a substance abuse, misuse, if you some of these young persons also have intellectual disabilities, factors like that. The individual is important, but also group. I call it group. I could call it gang, because that's quite obvious in these narratives that these young people, the gang, the group, that's their family. So the group also affects what goes on sexually. Some things are expected within this group, for instance, to have an early sexual debut. But also the society or more structural factors affect these things. These are not upper class young people, mostly. They come from impoverished areas. Is that right? So everything together ends up that it's worth the risk. And I think that's a very important message from young persons to us as professionals. We have to listen and understand and accept that in order to help.
And Malin would share some of the narratives from the young persons about, for example, about awareness, which I can read the voice of the young person, maybe Malin can explain later on. You know, I never wanted a child. I think it's creepy with the belly and all. Plus, I'm not mature enough. And if I have it, the social services would take it from me, and I don't want that to happen. I want to be able to, I want my child to grow up safe. I want a lot of money, a good guy, an apartment, a job, and things like that. You're supposed to take care of yourself before you take care of a child. Rebecca, 17.
And this is, apart from having a risk awareness, knowing quite a lot about sexual risk, this also shows an awareness of, she knows what kind of a situation she is. Yep.
We also have stories about pragmatism. Well, I have one now, a fuck buddy, and I have another that I talk to, see, someone I try to make into, to fix a relationship with. And I always have another one on the side. It's like a car. You always keep a spare tire in the trunk. That's how it works in my world. You always keep a spare girl. You get it? Ibrahim, 17.
And this shows, I suppose that's quite common in the UK as well. You don't have to be married or engaged. You can have sex with somebody you love or just sex with somebody. And that's quite common in this group as among other young persons in Sweden. I would just like to comment on these gender differences. We've heard about them earlier today, and of course we have them as well. Although all the issue of equality between genders is quite strong in Sweden, so all the young persons know very well that they're not supposed to take advantage. Boys are not supposed to take advantage of girls, but sometimes, of course, that happens. But it's not as every girl is a victim. Quite the contrary. They are quite. They have quite an agency.
And a big question that
Yeah.
we work with, we call it the fat question. I don't know if it's.
Ska jag ta den? Yeah, and this is a very, very big question, fat one. How balance all this risk-taking, exposure or exploitation? Because these young persons, at the same time, they have their rights, and how can you build resilience among vulnerable youth? And we do not have an answer. I'm planning to use the next 20 years of my academic career to maybe get a bit closer to an answer. And maybe it's important to know that we do not have the answer as well.
But we have some suggestions.
Yes, we have some suggestions.
Maybe we should share them with them.
Yeah.
And one of the suggestions is, first, this we could talk quite a lot about, both of us, viewing risk as a social construction. Just like we talk about gender and sexuality as social culture construct, we need to think that risk is also constructed in terms of norms in the group we belong to. Like most of us in here, probably educated middle class, and we have our ways of constructing risk. And we have to be aware of that when we communicate and talk about risk. We have to be aware of norms and values in the group. And this challenge the rationality of risk, because in risk research there is a basic understanding in most risk research that you're always rational as a person, and rationality comes to being scientific rationality, and so. But this view of risk as a social construct can challenge that perspective and think about other kind of rationalities. We would go so far away say there are no irrational sexual behavior. There's another type of rationality. We have to understand that type of rationality. It's quite difficult, but it's a challenge. Young people at risk, we already meet them, and that's also something that we can clearly see from our studies, that the question that some social workers, health educators say, we need to reach these groups. Well, we already do. They already come to us. It's sometimes I say it's not them that are the problem, it's us. We are the problem because we don't meet their needs, and that's the third thing that I want to suggestion, a challenge is to be better at meeting needs of young people and really asking, both scientifically but also in daily work, find out what are their needs, not our needs, but their needs to improve. Because most people want to take care of themselves, their bodies, and but we need to know what kind of tools, knowledge do they need. It might sound very simple, but it's very, very difficult to work in that way. And the third one, we have to remember these people, young people are, some of them are marginalized in the society, outside the society, in a quite tough society today where we say the winner takes it all, for quoting ABBA. You know, those who already have get more, those that don't have, they get less. And so that's why as social worker, health educators, we need also to work on structural issues, policy changes, and protect these people's rights as citizens to get good health care. Yes, I switch over to your...
this is a more practical suggestion, and it is what came out of my thesis. It's a sex education curriculum to be used at these group homes. And I'll just go through some of the critical points in this education, and it is that it should be dialogical. It should not be that the grown-up tells the young person this is how it should be. That's not good. And also norm-critical. Having a norm-critical approach is very effective within sex education, because then it's more easy to discuss why are things the way they are. So also norm critical.
And norm critical also means that we criticize our own, who we are, what we think about what is healthy, sexuality, and so on.
Norm criticism is a way to getting closer to the everyday life of the young person, I believe. And also it's inspired by harm reduction. I do not think the age of legal consent is 15, but the aim of such a sex education cannot be for persons under 15 to stop having sex. That would be an utopic, but rather making the sex as less risk as possible, of course. And lastly, it is also inspired by something called trauma-informed sex education, and by that, in this group of young people, we do know, as the table we saw earlier, the figures, that there are many who have experienced sex against their will or negative sexual experiences, and nevertheless, the need for education or knowledge can still be there. So I do believe, that's my experience from working at a group home, that sometimes, as somebody mentioned earlier, if the stories these young people carry are too horrifying, we take a step back instead of taking a step forward.
I put on this model that I know they talk about quite a lot, Malin.
Just 5 minutes.
Yeah, good. We'll make it. This model is just a suggestion how to think about, instead of taking this step back, take a step forward. And from the bottom there, permission. There should always be permission to discuss sexuality for young people. And especially to discuss their sexuality, not the sexuality that we want them to have. And if this is all of us working with young persons, very many of us, all of us have to give permission. Some people may have to provide limited information. Some may have to provide specific suggestions, but very few. You do not have to be a psychotherapist or a psychologist to discuss sexuality, even with the ones who have negative experiences. Permission to talk, I believe, is the most important.
And we like to keep the voices of the young people, so Malin shared one of the voices from our girl here that maybe you could read, Malin.
Yeah. I asked this girl, what's important then when you meet a grown-up and in discussions about sexuality? It doesn't matter, as long as it's not one of those stuck-up geeks. It should be someone self-confident. Otherwise, you feel, well, the teacher got embarrassed or something like that. And I think that's universal. Yeah. So
we have published in English also. So most of our published work are in Swedish to report, but we have some articles. So feel free to talk with us afterwards. We want to share experience. We also have some other studies going on, which we don't have time to talk about here now. We'll happy to talk about that later on.
Yeah.
So
that's it.
That's it.
I
Thanks
think.
for listening.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.